She laughed and whispered the words I didn't expect, and suddenly, everything changed. The first time I saw her, the world felt quieter somehow, as if everything else had dimmed just enough to let her presence shine through. She was across the room, standing with a natural ease that drew attention without demanding it. I caught the faintest curl of her smile as she adjusted her scarf, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. There was something about the way she carried herself, graceful, assured, but not without warmth, that made it impossible to look away. Our eyes met briefly, a spark that lingered longer than either of us expected. She tilted her head slightly, her expression caught somewhere between amusement and curiosity, and my chest tightened. It wasn't just her beauty, it was the subtle confidence in her posture, the gentle sway of her movements, the way her laughter, soft and lilting, seemed to ripple across the room. Even in that short glance, I could feel a story behind her eyes, one I desperately wanted to read. I remember noticing the little details that made her feel alive in a way no one else did. The way her fingers brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, revealing a delicate vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral, subtle, comforting, drifted across the space between us, stirring an unexpected warmth in my chest. And then there was the quiet energy she carried, confident, yet approachable, like someone who knew her worth but wasn't afraid to be human. I tried to focus on something else, a book in my hands, the hum of conversation around me, but my gaze kept drifting back. There was a magnetic pull, the kind that makes you feel like you've stumbled upon a secret meant only for you. Even as she turned to speak with someone else, I noticed how she laughed, not loudly, but with a soft, genuine warmth that lingered in the air. It was as if the sound itself had weight, settling in my mind and refusing to leave. There was also a quiet tension in those first moments, the subtle push and pull of curiosity. I wanted to approach her, to speak, to somehow turn this fleeting connection into something more, but a part of me hesitated. It wasn't fear of rejection, it was the delicate sense that something meaningful was already unfolding, quietly, through shared glances and the unspoken understanding that neither of us fully acknowledged yet. By the time I finally gathered the courage to step closer, the room felt charged with anticipation. I noticed the way her eyes flicked up, meeting mine again, that same hint of amusement playing at the corner of her lips. That single look said more than words ever could. In that moment, I realized that this was the beginning, not of a rush, not of an instant romance, but of a slow, careful unfolding, where every glance, every gesture, and every laugh would matter. And somehow I knew I would remember it forever. After that first fleeting encounter, I found myself thinking about her more often than I expected. There was something disarming about the way she moved through the world, confident, yet approachable, and I longed for another chance to be near her. That chance came sooner than I anticipated, in the form of a casual conversation that neither of us could have predicted would matter so much. We met in a quiet corner of a coffee shop, the kind of space where the soft hum of conversation and the faint clink of cups create a gentle cocoon. I tried to play it cool, but the moment our eyes met, I felt a familiar tug in my chest. She tilted her head slightly, as if challenging me to notice the little things about her, the curve of her smile, the way her eyes glimmered with amusement even when she tried to look serious. The conversation started lightly, almost teasingly. I made a casual comment about something we both observed, a book on the table, the way sunlight caught the rim of her coffee cup. She laughed, a soft, musical sound that immediately made the room feel warmer. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a signal, a quiet invitation that carried with it an unexpected intimacy. And then, without warning, she said it. "I shouldn't say this, but you're adorable." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than I expected. I felt my pulse quicken, a flush rising to my cheeks. Her eyes twinkled as she watched my reaction, and I realized that she had intentionally disrupted the balance of casual conversation, tipping it into something more charged, more personal. I could feel the warmth of the moment lingering in the space between us, subtle but undeniable. As she spoke, her hand brushed against mine while reaching for her cup, a fleeting touch, yet one that sent an unexpected shiver through me. It wasn't electric in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, human way that made me acutely aware of her presence. The brush of her fingers, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of coffee, the tilt of her head as she awaited my response, it all combined into a moment that felt suspended in time. I smiled, perhaps awkwardly, perhaps sincerely. I wasn't entirely sure which. But I could see her amusement deepening, the soft laugh lines near her eyes growing more pronounced as if my reaction delighted her. In that instant, I realized that this playful, teasing moment was more than just words. It was a bridge, a gentle invitation to let our walls down, to step into a space where subtle emotions could breathe and grow. By the time we parted that afternoon, there was a new unspoken understanding between us. That simple compliment had shifted something imperceptibly yet irrevocably. It was a quiet acknowledgement of attraction, a spark of vulnerability wrapped in humor, and the first real step toward the slow, intricate unfolding of something neither of us fully knew the shape of yet, but both of us felt was inevitable. After that playful compliment, our interactions began to feel almost accidental, yet each encounter seemed deliberately orchestrated by some unseen force. Whether it was passing by in the hallway, waiting in line at a café, or attending the same small gatherings, our paths kept crossing. And with each moment, a quiet curiosity began to grow, a curiosity about her, about the nuances of her expressions, and about the subtle ways she seemed to notice me without saying anything outright. We started spending time together in small, unassuming ways. One afternoon, she asked me to help carry some files into a conference room. Her hands brushed against mine briefly, lingering just long enough to make me acutely aware of the warmth of her skin and the natural steadiness of her touch. There was nothing overtly romantic in the gesture, yet it carried the weight of intimacy, a silent acknowledgement that she trusted me, even in the smallest interactions. During coffee breaks, we would find ourselves side by side, leaning slightly closer than necessary as we discussed mundane topics, work, favorite books, weekend plans. And yet, every pause between words seemed deliberate, every glance charged with curiosity. I noticed the subtle ways she observed me, the way her eyes would track my gestures, the quiet smile that appeared when I spoke passionately about something I cared about, and the way she sometimes laughed softly, as if enjoying a private joke that only we shared. There were also moments of vulnerability I hadn't anticipated. I caught her staring out the window once, lost in thought, a faint crease of concern on her brow. Without thinking, I reached out to place a hand lightly on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Instead, her shoulder leaned subtly into mine, a quiet acceptance of my presence. The warmth of that touch, fleeting though it was, made the air between us feel denser, more intimate. It wasn't dramatic, but it was electric in its subtlety, a shared acknowledgement of trust and unspoken connection. I, too, began to notice my own reactions, the way my heartbeat seemed to quicken whenever she laughed, the way I found myself scanning the room for her before noticing anything else, the way a casual touch or brush of her hand could leave me thinking about it long after she had walked away. Every shared moment, no matter how ordinary, began to carry significance, layering our connection with a delicate tension that neither of us fully understood but both felt. The audience, if watching, would sense the quiet magic in these everyday interactions, the slow unfolding of mutual fascination, the subtle dance of attention and reaction. Every small laugh, glance, or accidental brush of skin deepened the emotional thread between us. There was no rush, no pressure, only the growing awareness that something meaningful was forming, something patient and deliberate. It was the kind of connection that couldn't be forced, the kind that required observation, sensitivity, and the willingness to savor the smallest of moments. By the end of these shared moments, it was clear that the attraction was no longer just curiosity. It had become a quiet, simmering awareness of each other's presence, a recognition that even in the simplest exchanges, there was a depth waiting to be explored. As the days passed, the quiet curiosity between us began to evolve into something more fragile and complex. Every glance, every small touch, every shared laugh carried a weight neither of us fully understood, and yet the intensity of our connection grew. What had started as playful intrigue now carried the subtle tension of unspoken thoughts, of emotions felt but not yet expressed. I found myself analyzing every detail of our interactions. When she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, was it simply a habitual gesture, or a way to draw my attention? When she laughed softly at something I said, was it genuine amusement, or a silent acknowledgement of something she didn't dare name? Each moment became layered, rich with ambiguity, and I struggled with the fear of misreading her signals. I didn't want to risk the delicate balance we had built, yet the desire to bridge the gap between us was undeniable. She, too, carried her own hesitations. I could sense it in the slight pause before she spoke, the way her eyes would dart away when they lingered too long on mine, and the careful modulation of her tone. There was an unspoken wariness beneath her confident exterior, a quiet protection of her heart, perhaps, or the awareness of the difference in our worlds. And yet, in the way she allowed moments of closeness, a shared cup of coffee, a brief brush of hands, I could see the cracks in her armor, glimpses of vulnerability she didn't fully reveal. One afternoon, we found ourselves sitting on a bench in the park, the sun low in the sky, painting the air golden. The conversation had slowed, leaving space for silence. It was one of those silences charged with unspoken emotion, where the air itself seemed to hum with what we weren't saying. I could feel the warmth of her presence beside me, the subtle shift of her body as she adjusted to face me slightly more. My hand itched to bridge the gap, to touch, to reach for something tangible in the midst of so much ambiguity, but I hesitated, respecting the fragile boundary we had yet to cross. Her eyes met mine then, soft but searching, and I realized she was struggling with her own restraint. There was a flicker of something unspoken, curiosity, longing, perhaps even fear. I wanted to say something, to break the tension with words, but I feared that speaking too soon would shatter the fragile intimacy we had nurtured. So we sat there, side by side, letting the silence carry our shared vulnerability, each of us aware of the other's emotional heartbeat without needing to verbalize it. The audience would feel the quiet tension in this moment, the ache of proximity without release, the yearning tempered by caution. Every glance, every gesture, every micro-expression becomes a conduit for emotion, revealing the depth of feeling beneath surface interactions. It's in these hesitant, unspoken moments that the romance takes root, subtle but powerful, building the anticipation for the first real confession of emotion. By the end of this part, it's clear that the slow burn connection has deepened. The hesitation, the vulnerability, and the unspoken thoughts have created a tension that is both delicate and compelling. The stage is set for the next step, moments of intentional closeness, touches that carry meaning, and the undeniable pull of emotional intimacy. The tension that had quietly simmered between us finally began to manifest in moments of intentional closeness. Nothing abrupt or dramatic, just small, meaningful gestures that spoke volumes. Every brush of a hand, every shift in proximity, carried a weight that neither of us needed to define with words. In these moments, the romance was tactile, grounded in trust, curiosity, and the subtle thrill of emotional intimacy. It began with something as simple as helping her with a scarf on a chilly morning. My fingers brushed hers as I adjusted it around her neck, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to that touch. It was brief, yet enough to send a ripple of warmth through my chest. I noticed the slight shiver that traveled through her shoulders and the soft exhales she let out, almost unconsciously. It wasn't romance in a bold, obvious sense. It was the quiet acknowledgement of trust and comfort that often carries more weight than words ever could. Over time, our interactions grew bolder, though never reckless. We found ourselves sitting side by side during casual conversations, the space between us shrinking with a natural ease. She would tilt her head toward me, her hair occasionally brushing my arm. I could feel the warmth of her presence, and the subtle pressure of shared space, the way our bodies communicated in silence what neither dared to speak aloud. The audience would sense this intimacy, the brush of fingertips, the brief touch of shoulders, and the way proximity alone can make a heart race. There were moments when her laughter became a conduit for closeness. She would lean slightly into my shoulder while telling a story, her breath warm against my skin, her hand grazing mine as if by accident, or perhaps not. The tactile dimension of these interactions was inseparable from their emotional significance. Each gentle touch, every accidental brush, every shared look made the connection feel alive, tangible, and urgent without ever crossing into overt or inappropriate territory. Even everyday tasks became opportunities for subtle affection. Passing her a cup of coffee, adjusting a jacket she had forgotten to zip, or standing near her to share a view, each moment was rich with sensation. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the environment, the warmth radiating from her body, the way her fingers lingered near mine just a moment longer than necessary. Every detail mattered, every pause, every subtle movement deepening the sense of closeness. What made these encounters so compelling was the unspoken understanding between us. We both knew the significance of each small gesture. There was a mutual awareness, a silent conversation happening through body language, the tilt of a head, the gentle brush of a hand, the way our eyes met and held. The emotional weight of these touches was amplified by restraint, by not rushing, by savoring each moment. We allowed anticipation and desire to build naturally, creating a slow-burn intimacy that felt profoundly real. By the end of this part, the stage is set for the emotional climax. The physical affection, subtle, tender, and respectful, has deepened the bond between us, heightening emotional stakes and preparing the audience for the eventual confession of feelings. Every glance, every touch, every shared moment now carries the promise of something more, waiting to unfold with patience, care, and undeniable warmth. After weeks of subtle glances, gentle touches, and quiet shared moments, the tension between us reached its peak, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but with a slow, deliberate recognition of what had been building all along. It happened in a quiet corner of her favorite café, the kind of place where soft light filters through tall windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floor. The hum of conversation and the gentle clink of cups created a comforting backdrop, cocooning us in a space that felt intimate, private, and suspended in time. We sat across from each other, coffee warming our hands, yet neither of us immediately spoke. Instead, there was a silence loaded with anticipation, one that neither of us could ignore. I noticed the way her fingers traced the rim of her cup, the delicate curve of her lips as they pressed together, and the subtle tension in her shoulders that betrayed the emotions she tried to keep hidden. I, too, felt my chest tighten, my heartbeat sinking with the unspoken rhythm between us. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and a touch hesitant. "I've been trying to tell myself that this is just a fleeting thing, but I can't anymore." Her eyes met mine, searching, vulnerable, and entirely sincere. There was a pause, just long enough for the air between us to thicken with expectation. My hand itched to reach across the table, to bridge the physical gap that mirrored the emotional distance we had tiptoed around for so long. "I feel the same," I said softly, careful not to rush, letting the words carry the weight of all the moments we had shared. "I've been noticing you. All the little things, the way you laugh, the way you notice things no one else does. I think about them more than I probably should." Her smile broke gently, a mixture of relief, amusement, and tenderness. She leaned slightly forward, the faintest shift in posture that closed the distance between us without needing to touch. I noticed the warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the aroma of coffee, and the soft cadence of her breathing that somehow grounded me in that moment. Then, as if to confirm our mutual understanding, she let her hand brush mine on the table. The touch was brief but electric in its quietness, a physical acknowledgement of the emotional truth we had just spoken. My chest felt simultaneously heavy and light, buoyed by the sincerity of her presence and the depth of what we had just admitted. In that moment, there were no dramatic gestures, no urgent declarations, only the steady, undeniable pull of connection, the intimacy of vulnerability, and the quiet joy of being seen and understood. The audience would feel the culmination of anticipation, the delicate balance of restraint and release, and the satisfaction of witnessing a slow-burn romance reach its first true emotional crescendo. By the end of this part, the emotional stakes have been fully realized. Our confession has unlocked the next phase of our connection, a shared rhythm of affection, trust, and closeness that will carry the story toward a warm, fulfilling resolution. Every glance, every subtle gesture, and every unspoken word now has new meaning, solidifying the bond we've been nurturing all along. The confession had changed everything, yet in the most natural way possible. There was no rush, no need to define every feeling immediately, just a quiet understanding that something meaningful had begun, something built on trust, laughter, and the careful accumulation of small, shared moments. The days that followed were filled with a comforting rhythm, a soft cadence of emotional intimacy and tender attention that made even ordinary experiences feel extraordinary. We started spending time together deliberately but effortlessly. A casual walk through the park became a shared ritual, where the golden afternoon light seemed to highlight the subtle intimacy between us. Our hands brushed often, lingering slightly longer than necessary, and sometimes we would sit side by side on a bench, sharing a quiet laugh or a comfortable silence that spoke louder than words. Each gesture was small, yet it carried the weight of what we had confessed: affection, care, and the joy of being fully seen. Touch became a language of its own. A gentle hand on the small of her back as we navigated crowded streets, her fingers brushing mine while passing an object, the soft press of her shoulder against mine when we laughed. Each movement was deliberate yet understated. It was a tactile conversation, a way of communicating trust and emotional closeness without ever needing to force the moment. The audience would notice the way these gestures, though simple, carried enormous emotional resonance. We also discovered the pleasure of quiet, domestic moments. Sharing coffee in the morning, lingering over conversation without urgency, walking through markets and stopping at familiar stalls, everyday experiences gained a richness I hadn't anticipated. There was laughter, teasing, and playful glances, but also a profound comfort in knowing we were there for each other. The slow-burn nature of our relationship allowed every small interaction to deepen the bond, creating layers of connection that felt genuine and enduring. Our conversations became more vulnerable, yet lighter in a comforting way. She shared stories of her past with a soft openness, and I felt free to express my own thoughts and fears. There was a gentle reciprocity in our dialogue, a way of learning each other's inner rhythms without fear of judgment. Even in moments of silence, our proximity, the touch of hands or elbows, or the shared gaze across a room spoke volumes about the trust we had cultivated. By the end of this chapter, the story reaches a satisfying resolution. There is no dramatic climax, no urgent declaration needed, because the emotional arc has been carefully nurtured. The tension, curiosity, and vulnerability that marked the earlier parts of our story have blossomed into a tender, steady warmth. It is a romance built not on haste or spectacle, but on the quiet, human moments that reveal genuine connection. The audience leaves with a sense of contentment, witnessing a slow-burn romance that honors restraint, trust, and emotional depth. Every glance, every brush of skin, every shared smile tells the story of two people who have found each other in subtle, meaningful ways, and who now move forward together with understanding, care, and a quiet joy that lingers long after the story ends.